You know, from time to time, every parent asks this question. I know my mom and dad asked it when the phone rang one day and it was the police on the other end of the line, and they were informing my parents that I had driven a ski boat up on a highway. Takes a lot of skill to do that, by the way. I know I asked that question when my daughter Rebecca turned 16, and she had been looking forward to that day because that's when she was going to take her first solo drive in the car. And so she walked out and she got in the car and cranked the engine. And as she did, I came alongside her and kind of slipped back into that coaching style of being a dad that we talked about last week that you need to move out of in the teenage years. And she said, "Okay, Dad, I got it. Just I'm ready to go." So I said, "Fine." So she slipped the car into gear, just like a teenager, turned on the radio, said goodbye to me, looked back so she could drive back down the driveway, pressed the gas, and went forward. Right through our picket fence, right into the basketball goal that a couple of months ago I'd worked so hard setting up for the boys. In fact, even to this day, I think I ruined their shot. She ruined their shot because that goal was forever tilted just a little to the right. And in that moment, I asked the question that every parent asks from time to time. My mom and dad, their parents before them. If you're a dad, you've asked this question, and that is, are kids worth it? Are they worth it? Today, for many people, especially for a lot of young people, there are a lot of what I call qualms. You see them there on your outline. Hesitations about being a parent, and in our case, about being a dad. Let me mention 4 of them. First, there's the money qualm. The reason I mention the money qualm is because if you've done any figuring out lately, you realize that kids are just dang expensive. I mean, from the time they're born to the time they leave you at 18, if that's when they leave you, you're going to have invested about $200,000. If you add maybe $60K for going to college, then you better be working on weekends right now because they're going to cost you a small fortune. In my case, with 4 of them, right off the top, I'm $1 million+ into the game. Kids are expensive. And for young people, anticipating the future, that's a hesitation. Then there's the time and effort qualm. It asks the question, how can I, as a mom or dad, do all the things that I want to do and have kids too? And the answer is, you can't. That's the hard bottom line. You know, there was a time in the 1970s where women were told that they could have it all. It was the beginning of the women's liberation movement. They were told that they could be full-time moms and full-time careerists in the workplace. The term that was used in the 70s was super mom. By the 90s, they were using the term super myth because it just didn't work. So you have a lot of moms today who are constantly dealing with the guilt and the exhaustion of a divided allegiance between the workplace and between home, and how you manage all those, and how you as a dad and as a husband fit into all of that. And I found it interesting that even in our day, where we're experiencing the greatest equality between men and women ever, surveys show that women are less satisfied than they've ever been with their lives. Less satisfaction and greater equality. Go figure. Then there's the selfishness qualm. For many young people today, the thought of children seems more like an intrusion into life than a reward. Young people aged 15 to 29 were recently asked to respond to the following statement. Here's the statement. Children are one of the main purposes of marriage. 79% of those young people disagreed, citing personal happiness as the main reason for marriage. And that strong mindset of me and my personal happiness has led over the last 40 years to America experiencing for the first time a declining birth rate. Between 1960 and the year 2000, the birth rate in America has fallen 43%. Were you aware of that? If it were not for immigration today in America, our country would be in a population decline, as most of Europe is now in a major way. Then a final qualm is what I call the culture qualm. Some couples, and maybe you're one of these, look at our world, the violence, the excesses, the moral pollution, the drugs, the unwholesome peer pressure, and conclude, who would want to raise a kid in this world? In fact, a lot of parents who have kids sometimes struggle with that. When asked which is harder to raise kids today or provide financially for them, even though we've looked at the finances, 65% of all parents say, raising a good kid is much harder because of the world in which they're growing up in. Those are the qualms that people feel, especially young people, when they ask the question, are kids worth it? It's a good question, isn't it? And I want you to know the best way to answer that question is not looking at the fears on the front end, but actually going to the participants, people like you and me who have children, and asking them, are kids worth it? Let me give you the facts. Here's what parents say when interviewed about the impact of children on their lives. Here's what they tell us. First, 97% of all parents say they have no regrets in having children. Wow. 75% of all parents assert that having children actually strengthened their marriage. Wow. 89% of all parents say that having children increased their enjoyment of life. Wow. And 81% of all parents say watching their children grow up is life's greatest pleasure. Those are some amazing statistics. But they shouldn't surprise us, and the reason they shouldn't surprise us is because an ancient book we call the Bible has been saying that for thousands of years. I want you to look at this verse from Psalm 127 and just feel the emotion of this psalm. It starts with a great word, behold. That's kind of headline news. Behold, children are a gift of the Lord. The fruit of the womb is a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior, so are the children of one's youth. How blessed, or we could substitute, how happy, how fulfilled, how satisfied is the man whose quiver is full of them. Children are worth it. They're especially worth it to a man who understands it's one of the great callings of his life. But here's the challenge for every man in this room who will have kids, and that's knowing what to do as a dad. Children are an intimidating presence. You go to this mirror called home and you look at it in the morning and you say, mirror, mirror on the wall, is my fathering any good at all? And you look in that mirror and oftentimes what comes back to you is a sense of lostness, insecurity. Sometimes you feel a sense of guilt. Just kind of have this kind of low-grade guilt. Am I a good dad? Do I know what fathering is all about? In fact, in a recent survey, they found that 74% of all fathers in America feel inadequate when it comes to being a dad. So if you're in the room today, and last week when we talked about those big picture perspectives on parenting, and you kind of felt, man, I just don't feel like I'm measuring up. Hey, join the crowd. We all are part of those feelings, because shaping a life, launching it like an arrow into the future so it hits its target and does something out there, that's a challenge much bigger than anything you'll ever face in the workplace. It's a challenge that has a legacy that will go far beyond any plaque you hang on the wall, any promotion you get in the workplace. It will disappear when you disappear, but not your children. They're the living messages you'll send to a time you'll never see, and they'll continue to influence long after you're gone. Last week we talked about those big picture perspectives. Today what I'd like to do is bring it all down into a specific game plan. What I'd like to do to start today is just kind of look at what I think are 5 types of dads. Maybe you'll recognize a piece of you in these 5 snapshots. First of all of us are probably aware of the absent dad. When I mention the absent dad, I mean one who's just physically not there. You want to hear a staggering statistic? In 1950, 7% of all fathers in America could be called the absent dad. Want to take a guess what the figure is in the year 2004? 40%. 40% of all dads are absent fathers. And in the wake of that absence, you have this mass of young humanity growing up with a huge void inside that will create emotional and psychological trauma and behavioral problems and addictions for a lifetime. That's what we're unleashing on our country today. The absent dad is responsible for that. Then kind of close to him is what I call the distant dad. This is the dad who's home, but the kids don't feel it. He has this uncanny ability, the distant dad, to be around and invisible at the same time. Do you have a home like that? That's the home I grew up in, with the distant dad. My brothers and I saw him for 18 years. He was around every day, and yet at the same time, he just simply dissolved in the home. He disappeared. He was there. We could touch him. We just couldn't feel him. We didn't feel his heart. We didn't feel his life. We didn't feel his beliefs. I never heard my dad's beliefs, his understandings about what life was all about, his wisdom. And I don't think it was because he didn't have any. He did. It's just he never found the golden key to unlock his heart and open his life and let 3 young sons who desperately needed to connect with him connect. He was there, and he wasn't. That's the distant dad. Then there's the demanding dad, the one who makes contact with his children, but his way of making contact is mainly through directives, through orders, through control, through power. He's the authoritarian dad that we talked about last week. Remember on that graph? That's how he connects, through rulership. And it's so easy for a man to become this kind of father, but as we saw last week, it's so easy to unleash harmful and lasting consequences on children because, as we learned, that's one of the worst forms of parenting. But it's so easy to drift into the authoritarian, isn't it? Then there's the involved, but what I call visionless dad. This, to me, is the best of the dads so far, and I might add, it is a very positive and growing trend in our world today, and even in our community. There are a lot of dads who are getting involved in their families in new and exciting ways. This is the dad who invests in his children, expresses love to them, participates in their activities, helps them succeed, spends time with them. He does a lot of good things. He's an involved dad. But he comes up short in one major aspect, and that's this. He's a dad who's around and involved, but he fails to deliver a vision for life. He fails to deliver what I call life-winning strategies for his children. He kind of goes with the flow. He rocks along and responds, and that's good. But he never takes a more proactive step in teaching his children things like what values you view life through. What are the things you can really count on in life? How do you become a man, and how do I know I become a man? And would you help me become a man? He's a dad who would be clueless on that. Or how do you deal with the opposite sex in an honorable and right way? What's marriage all about? What are the purposes of marriage? What's my role going to be in marriage in a changing world and a changing emphasis on the genders? How do you know God? What is living life well all about? What are the things I could count on for a lifetime? And what are the key moves to know how to prepare for the changing seasons of my life? Dad, would you tell me? How do you prepare for puberty? How do you prepare for college? How do you prepare for work? Get me ready for marriage. See, the dad who's the involved but visionless dad, he's having a good time with his kids. They take trips and vacations and have fun and laugh and watch sports together. He helps them sometimes with their homework. He's involved in certain little crises. But he leaves out the more substantive things of life. Because he himself is not necessarily sure about those things. And even if he was, he doesn't know how to engage individual children in a way that he could deposit those nuggets of wisdom and thought and feeling in a way that would steady them in life and prepare them for what's to come. Which brings me to the fifth type of dad, what I call the involved and strategic dad. This is the dad who does more than just roll with life. He has a proactive plan. He has a strategy for ensuring that many of the substantive things of life are deposited in a constructive way in his kids before they leave home. He knows what those things are. Do you know what those things are? He knows what those things are, and he knows when they need to be deposited, and he has a plan for how to do that. You know, both the Old and the New Testament speak of this kind of parenting. That we're to be fathers, dads who are involved. Yes, we need to be that around our kids, but also proactively pushing them, prodding them, encouraging them, strategically investing in them in a way that moves them out in life in a healthy way. Look at Proverbs 22:6 on the screen for a moment. Here's what it says. Train up. That sounds like proactivity, doesn't it? Train up a child in the way he should go, and even when he's old, he will not depart from it. Now, guys, when you see that verse, it says, train up a child in the way he should go, don't think of some sterile religious training. This train up is hardcore training in the street, in the marketplace, with women. It's those winning life strategies that I was talking about. That's what dad needs to be about in the life of his son, and you should do it according to their particular bent or personality, like the project you got last week on knowing the personality of your child. Train up a child, actually it says in the Hebrew, according to his bent, according to his uniqueness. That's how you're to invest those winning strategies. And when he's old, he's going to be stable, or she's going to be stable in life and know how to live life well. The New Testament says the same thing. Look at Ephesians 6:4. It says, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up. That sounds proactive, doesn't it? Bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. And again, when it says discipline and instruction of the Lord, we're not talking about Sunday school, taking them to church. Those are good things. But we're talking about a much more personal investment in your child's life with wisdom that works in real life, just like what we've been doing here. You help them learn how to handle conflict. You help them deal with sex. You help them know how to do their money. You help them prepare for what work is all about. It's real life stuff. But notice the verse. If you don't do that, what's the alternative for a child? You see it there? It's anger, isn't it? By not providing those things, you're provoking them to anger. And you know why? Because they'll go out into life and they'll make unnecessary, foolish mistakes. They'll buy into what their peers are saying and implement losing strategies, not winning strategies. And life is going to beat them up because you didn't proactively prepare them in advance. Now, I say all that to bring us to the game plan that's on the next page in your outline. I want to look at it for a moment. It's just a sketch of a game plan that we're going to fill in, and then you can even fill it in further as you take some of the concepts and develop them even beyond what I'm going to give you today. But let me show you how this diagram is organized. This is just on the screen is a partial diagram. You have the whole thing in your hand. You'll probably need to refer to it as I go through this. But let me just get you oriented to the diagram for a moment. Look over to the left for a moment, and you see these categories under what a son or daughter needs. The four categories is to see, to hear, to receive, and to experience. Everybody see that? Those, I believe, are the four categories of strategic fatherhood. Every son or daughter needs to see certain things, hear certain things, receive certain things from you, and experience certain things with you. And we're going to fill out the elements under each of those categories in a moment. Next, notice the numbers across the top. You see it in black? They start with 1 and they go all the way to 21. Those numbers represent individual years, all the way to 21. I'm using 21 to represent the years that a child, son or daughter, is going to be under your care. Then you see on your diagram all these stars and dots. See them there? And then below, I kind of give you a key to what those stars and dots mean. The stars represent items that in a particular year are going to be especially important that you make sure you do. The dots there are years where there's a special opportunity for you to do something with your son or with your daughter. So to give you an example, before we fill this in, just look under year 7 for a moment. If you look at year 7, just go down the column, because that represents that year in your child's life. And what you should see there are 2 stars. One, that they are going to need to see something, and one that they're going to need to hear something in that year from you that's especially important. If you look down that column, you'll also see 3 dots. 2 under what they need to receive from you, and 1 under what they need to experience from you. Now here's how the diagram works before I fill it out for you in just a moment. You're a dad. You're wanting to be a strategic dad, and your child is 7 years old. You pull out your game plan. And under your game plan in that year 7 with your child, what you're going to see are 5 things that I need to do with that child this year in order to be a proactive, strategic dad. Everybody understand that? Okay, let's fill out the diagram real quickly, and then you'll see how it works. First, let's just fill out the things that a child needs to see from you during the years they are under your charge. 3 things. First thing they need to see, it's what we've been talking about for weeks here, they need to see dad loving mom. And if you'll notice, there's stars in every year from 1 to 21. That's because the greatest gift you will ever give your child is loving your wife. Because when you love your wife well, you teach your children 2 things. You teach your children that love is real and possible as a concept. And then you also teach your children how love really works. Those are 2 of the greatest gifts you can ever give a child. Because when they go out into life, the 2 things they need to know that are foundational to their happiness is love is real. Did you know a lot of kids today don't believe love is real? They know sex is real. They can hook up, but they don't know how to be intimate. And part of the reason they don't know how to be intimate is because they're not sure real intimacy exists. Because back in their little incubator called home, it didn't work. With the 2 people they admired the most, it didn't work. And so they don't believe that love is real. The reason we've been discussing the last 8 weeks the relationship between a man and a woman, and for us as dads, our wives, is not just to make our relationship better. That's one of the reasons. But the other reason is so that we can empower our children to believe love is real. It's one of the greatest gifts you can give. And every year, from the time they are born to the time they leave home, they need to see how it's real and how it works. That's being a proactive dad. But you're going to have to take those proactive strategies we've taught for 8 weeks and make them work in front of your kids. Secondly, son or daughter needs to see dad's character. Dad's character. Proverbs 20, verse 7 says this, "A man who walks in his integrity, how blessed are his children after him." Wow. A man's character gives his children an inner stability that they can draw on for a lifetime. Just seeing dad do things, how he responds to things, they're drinking that in, and that becomes a grid through which they see life. And if it's a strong grid, they draw off of it forever. My friend Lee Burrell wrote this about his dad. "I have many rich memories of doing things with my dad, fun things, challenging things, quiet things, tedious things. But most of all, I remember my dad's character. His life taught me to appreciate people, to never take them for granted, to reach out to those less fortunate than ourselves, to refuse bigotry. He modeled not quitting to me and the value of hard work. He displayed a great deal of patience with me and trust in me. He encouraged me to do my best while he did the best he could." And then he writes these words, "So when I reflect upon my childhood and adolescence with my dad, there is much that is pleasant and good that rests there." Isn't that a great line? You have a flashback to dad when you're making a business decision, and there is much good that rests there. You're with a woman on a date, and you have a flashback to dad, and there's much good that rests there, and you draw upon that as a winning strategy for life. Notice the stars for dad's character are under ages 10 through 18. You see it there? That's when the stars start. Now, character is always important. But starting about 10, and especially into the teenage years, dad's character becomes supremely important because a child cognitively is developing to such a stage that they begin to put 2 and 2 together. They can match your words with your deeds during those years. So it's critically important that they match up, that they're integrated, which is the definition of integrity. You know what the foulest 4-letter word a child can use for dad that crushes his or her spirit? You mean to spell it out to you? F-A-K-E. And I can tell you a lot of men in business suits who will weep with me when they reflect back on the dad that they thought was their hero. And he turned out to be an F-A-K-E. Dad's character is important. Every child needs to see also dad's heart. Dad's heart, especially notice starting in year 13. Because in year 13, again, they start growing up, and you can be more than just dad. From 13 on, you become human to your son or daughter. And because you're now becoming human, they can see that you got clay feet just like everybody else. You can help them understand that by sharing your feelings and your dreams and your hopes and your regrets and your fears and your doubts. And over those years, if you do that, if you let them into your heart, you know what develops? You become more than just a dad to your son or daughter. You start becoming their friend. And if during those years you become their friend, especially starting about 13, by the time they're 21 or 25 or 27, they'll call you up today, they'll call you up on the phone one day and just want to hang out with their buddy. Because you've learned how to transition from being just this person who's towering over them to somebody who's walking through life with them, with the same foibles and flaws and struggles, but you can share it and encourage one another. That's what you want in the end with your son or daughter. You want a friend, but you got to show your heart. Best time to start doing that is when they hit their teenage years. So dad loving mom, dad's character, dad's heart, those are what a strategic dad makes sure his son or daughter sees. Then there are three things a dad needs to make sure his son or daughter hears. What are they? These three statements. I love you. I'm proud of you. And you're good at something. I leave the blank there because every child, according to their bent, is going to be different. But it's where a dad notices in his son or daughter certain specific qualities and admires those. I want you to notice the last two. I'm proud of you and you're good at, where they are on the graph, because you'll notice that those words are especially important according to the game plan in the teenage years. See it there? That's when the stars start showing up. Why is that? Because that's when your child is stepping out to be their own person. We mentioned this last week. They start differentiating themselves from you. They want to have their own space, be their own man, their own woman. And as they draw apart from you, they don't need you coaching them. They need you cheering for them, recognizing certain things in them. So moving from I love you, which is so good in those early years, to emphasizing I'm proud of you. You're good at. And really zeroing in on those specific qualities become an incredible proactive investment in your children, and helps them begin not only to feel good about themselves, but begin to take those qualities that you admire and then begin to make those things work about where I want to invest the rest of my life. You will steer your son or daughter quicker to where they need to be investing their life by understanding what they're the best at and admiring it. Not drawing back because it doesn't fit the grid you wanted them to be, but by uplifting who they really are and what they're really good at, not forcing them in as a round peg into a square knot. It won't work. You've got to take them where God has created them to go. And those words become unbelievably powerful in your son or daughter's life. You know, I find it interesting, and I've said this before in the previous men's fraternity, but it's interesting that every time you hear the audible voice of God in Jesus Christ's life, just read through the Gospels. There are only a few occasions where God actually speaks to His Son. But in every instance that He speaks to His Son, He uses these three statements. He always says the same thing. This is my beloved Son. I love Him. In whom I am well pleased. I'm proud of Him. Listen to Him. And by the listen to Him, the emphasis is He's a great leader. You need to be looking to this guy. It's an affirmation of the Father to the Son about who He is, proactively building powerful words into his life to help him know he's on track, he's on course, and he's loved. That's what a good dad does, even a heavenly Father. If Jesus needed that kind of instruction, that kind of encouragement, those kind of words through his life, how much more your son or daughter? Then thirdly, things a son or daughter needs to receive. Three things. First, affirming encouragement. We talked last week, as you notice the stars there, that starting about age 10, and especially moving to teenage years, you move from that coach to a cheerleader because the power of words, speaking in their life about who they are is so important. I remember sitting down with a young man who was trying to finish his dissertation at the University of Chicago in philosophy. And this guy was stuck. And I was trying to encourage him, and I never will forget what he said over coffee. He said, every time I sit down and try to finish this dissertation, I hear my dad's words. And I go, really? What did he say? You won't make it. You won't make it. Here this guy in his classwork, he had made straight A's. Now he was just down to the last thing, almost to the finish line. And what was constraining him was a dad who one day just offhandedly said, you won't make it. That school's too high for you. A word from Dad about potential, of promise, is a powerful thing. You just can't believe when you look at your son or daughter and say, you know, you're going to be a leader someday. You're going to travel the world someday. And those words hurtle down into their little spirits like a seed and take root and begin to grow. And the next thing you know, they're traveling the world. Next thing you know, they're leading the company. Where did they hear that? From a proactive dad who had a game plan, and he was saying, you know, when they start hitting these years, they need affirming words of encouragement. And regardless of how they look at a particular time, when they're 14 or 16, they've wrecked the car, they've done something wrong, I'm going to just keep pouring in those words of encouragement, not words of criticism, not the two things they did wrong, but the things that they have done right and the potential that they obviously possess. Then they need life instruction. Life instruction. Now just look at your diagram for a moment, and we'll go across this, because you see these dots, these places where there's special opportunities, but when they hit about 7 or 8, they can begin to hear things about certain virtues like loyalty or dependability or cleanliness or things like that. And you as a dad need to be thinking each year, what's a virtue I'm going to build into my son or daughter's life? I mean, when our kids were young, one of the things that we instituted was, you know, if you're going to go to school, you have to have your room cleaned. Now, they were 8 or 9, and they'd get up and they'd run down. The room would be dirty and stuff. We'd go, no. You know, as a contributing member of this household, sorry, you're going to be late for school, but you got to go clean your room. Well, what did that do? That helped them understand that there's just some basic little responsibilities they have. You know, getting to something on time in those early years, those are things that are very, very important. And you can teach them why and explain to them why in the fabric of life, not some instruction that you give sitting around a table that's sterile. It's right there in the midst of real-time living. Those things are real important. And a proactive dad's thinking every year in those early years, what's a virtue? What's a life skill I need to be building into my son or daughter? Notice when they hit 12, it's got their preparing for adolescence. You know, they're about to shift into a major new life stage called, you know, the teenage years. And their bodies are going to change, their voice is going to change, hair is going to grow, they're going to look different, feel different. It's a scary time. Who's going to hold their hand to walk over that bridge? A proactive dad is. I remember when each of my kids turned 12, my wife and I, the first thing we did was we invested in them getting up every morning over about a 6 to 8 week period of time, just individual, dad on sons, mom on daughters. When they would be going through that time, we'd go out and have a fun time, have a little breakfast, sit around and listen to a tape by Dr. James Dobson on preparing for adolescence, talking about emotions, talking about peer pressure. And then we'd have a discussion, talk about sex. Never forget, I had that time that morning with my son on sex, and that night he came out into my bedroom and got on the bed and said, "Can I talk to you some more about this?" He was still innocent enough he could just lay it all out. And I was proactive enough I could give it all back. But it set some necessary foundation stones for this season that they were going through, and I didn't want him to go through it without him having Dad talk to him in a proactive way. Look at the next one, number 13, the definition of manhood and womanhood. You know, at some point, it's good to inject what is a man and what is a woman. Now, you know, if you've been a part of men's fraternity, we talk about the definition of manhood. I've got resources that will tell you about the definition of manhood and the definition of womanhood if you'd like to consider that. But here's what I want you to know. For me as a dad, I have a definition. And I'm living it. And I've invited my kids to hold me accountable to it. The question is, do you have a definition? Can you tell your son or daughter, this is what a man is before God? And if you fulfill this, you're going to be fulfilled in life. And this is what a woman is. That's where I bring that in, and then I use that definition through the rest of their life. Notice after that there's instruction about boys and girls and friends and school, those kind of things. And then when they're about to launch out into college, which are work, but particularly college for most kids today, you know, I bring dads together and we have a little powwow with our sons. And we talk about what their goals should be, and we help envision For them, when they're about to leave for their freshman year, we have an evening where we paint what it's going to be like when they're getting their diploma at the university. And I go through this little litany of things. Won't it feel good if you're standing there with your diploma and you had made great grades? Because then everybody's going to want you. But beware, that first year, most students hit the tank. And then we talk about those experiences and how you play catch up. When you've got that 1 point after the first semester, you're playing catch up the rest of your life. But you go to college and you start with a 3.5 or a 3.4 or whatever because you really invested, didn't listen to the crowd, and then you begin to build on that foundation stone, and then you're standing there at graduation with companies wanting you. We talked to them about friends and how important it is to have good friends, healthy friends, and to do wonderful experiences. And we encourage them to think about experiences. Backpack Europe. Travel the world. Remember my son calling me one night. It was a Thursday night, and he and his friends were together, and Oklahoma was playing Nebraska in a big game in Norman. And he was saying, man, I'd love to go to that game. And I said, why don't you? He said, we don't have tickets or anything. I know. Well, you can work your way into the stadium. So I heard him say, hey, guys, you want to go to Norman? They said, yeah. So they drove all night over there, got there, got in with the ESPN crew, and went in and watched the game. Those are great experiences. And then we talked about growing in your spiritual life because it can become yours. See, they need that kind of encouragement. Notice they also need not just life instruction, they need Jesus in their life. And when they hit about 7 or 8, they're going to start asking, as we learned from that Dartmouth study last week, kids ask transcendent questions about God. Here's the thought, though, for you. Can you answer those questions? When you open the shower door, as I did years ago, and there's my little son standing there saying, I want to know God, will you have an answer? Can you connect them and connect the dots to God? That's really, really important. And then in the later years, when they get to be teenagers, that you help them understand that faith is not passive. Faith is an action word. So it means you're going to take faith steps, courageous. I like to connect faith and courage together. Courage with girls, courage with works of service, courage with going around the world to serve the God that they say they believe in. Those are things that a proactive dad does. So that's what they need to receive. And then finally, what they need to experience. 2 things. Special one-on-one times with Dad. One of the things I was told early as a young man, date your daughters. And I did that all through my life. When they were under my care, I'd take each daughter out on a date. And we just talk about life. And we got to be good friends. And we talked about deep issues in those dates. Notice as they get into the teenage years, you have a star and a dot because those become real special opportunities to invest in great memories with your kids. And let me tell you, I have great memories because I thought that through. Remember when I had the opportunity to go to China. Instead of taking an honorarium that somebody wanted to give me to come speak over there, I expended all that to take my daughter Elizabeth with me. One of the great memories that I have that sits there in a picture is us standing on the Great Wall together. Or my sons last year flying in a little biplane in Alaska. Just us, 8 days in the wilderness. Those build these great memories that your sons and daughters can look back on. But the time to do it is in those teenage years when they can appreciate being next to Dad in this almost friendship, deep friendship kind of experience. That's what I mean by special one-on-one times. Don't let your kids leave home without them. There need to be a multitude of those things in their lives. I love what Mason said to me one day when I took him out of school and we went fishing. We were in his truck. We were driving back. Windows were rolled down. We were having a Slurpee, and he looked over at me and he said, Dad, it doesn't get any better than this. And I thought, it really doesn't. Because the one memory I have of my dad that is so positive is the one day he took me out of school and we went fishing together. And it stands tall in my memory. Because it was just Me and Dad together. And then lastly, notice on there manhood ceremonies. And I've listed 4 there for you. I've listed them there because there are moments along the way, if you understand what being a man or being a woman is, you can create a little special event that initiates them into manhood and womanhood. And I put that there at 13 when you're giving them the definition up above. And then at 16, when they're growing in their manhood, you have a kind of a little special celebration. It's not to define manhood. You might write define under the one at 13, but at 16, it's to cheer for their growing manhood or womanhood. Then at 18, when they're going off to college, you challenge them in that manhood and womanhood with a special ceremony with friends or family or some other dads that you've joined with. And then at 21, that's when I induct my sons and daughters into manhood and womanhood. I just had the privilege of doing that with my son and putting that gold ring that represents the family crest on his finger and having the families that have been helping to raise him all there. It's a great moment. Simple moment. But I remember my son telling me the next day, he said, man, I couldn't even go to sleep last night. I kept thinking of the things you said because I gave him this big portrait of his days of playing football and with a poem that I wrote for him around this ceremony. He said, I couldn't go to sleep. I just kept thinking about it. I said, that's good, Garrett. That's what ceremonies are all about. Now you may say, I don't understand what you're talking about when you mention ceremonies. Well, I'll give you some resources here at the end when I finish that you can learn more about ceremonies. But let me just answer one question at this point, because some of you are saying this. I know you are. You're out there and you're saying, my son is 13 or my daughter's 18 or whatever, and they're way down the road from this game plan. So is it too late? Isn't that right? Aren't some of you asking that? Is it too late? I want you to mark this down. It is never too late to be a dad. Love, the Scripture says, covers a multitude of sins. And if your son or daughter is older and you're asking, well, where would I start? I mean, they're 17 years old. I can't do all these things now. Here's what I would do. I would start wherever you are, if you want to reconnect with your son or daughter, by thinking, is there anything I need to ask them forgiveness of? Because you know what you do when you go and ask your son or daughter forgiveness? You open up your chest and show your heart. You may need to go to them and say, hey, I need to ask your forgiveness. I was too busy. I need to ask your forgiveness. I didn't have a clue. I need to ask your forgiveness. I'm sorry I divorced your mom. I just didn't have a clue. Would you forgive me? And in that moment, you're going to do two things. You're going to show your heart, which is on the game plan. You're going to show your love, which is on the game plan. And you know what they're going to do? They're going to give you forgiveness because every son or daughter wants to reconnect with Dad. Once you've done that, then you begin to work the plan at the age in which they are and make up any ground from the past that you can. But you don't worry about doing everything. If there's some things you can do, great. But you just start working the plan. And I believe if you do that, what's going to happen is you're going to create a new connection with your son or daughter, even if they're 30 years old. But the one thing I would never say is it's too late to be a dad. It's never too late. Now, as I close, let me give you 3 resources. They're listed there for you. And these would just help flesh out, because I know all of you have got questions. Well, I don't know what a definition of manhood is and things like that. I don't know how to do a ceremony. To help flesh this out, but you're going to have to flesh it out the most. To help you flesh it out, 3 resources for you that I've done. One is the New Eve. You see it there. It's a 6 sessions on CD or DVD, and it's to help moms especially and daughters, but you need to be a part of this, gain a new perspective of what it means to be a woman in the 21st century. And in that is a definition of womanhood for you to consider. Secondly is the book that I wrote, Raising a Modern Day Knight, with focus on the family. That book focuses on a father's role, kind of goes more in depth to the things we're saying, but I think it's a helpful book. But what's specifically helpful for this session is there's a definition of manhood in that book, and there's a number of ceremonies that are illustrated there that you can draw ideas from. And then lastly, there is the Raising a Modern Day Knight video series that I've done with Dennis Rainey, where dads get together with other dads, 6 or 7 dads get together and go through this 6-part series together of specific ways to start investing in their sons now. And rather than tell you more of it, let's just stop for a moment and watch just a brief portion so you can get an idea of what it feels like in doing this video series together as dads. Let's watch.
Being a dad is a full-time job. It's 24/7, and if it's not, then you're losing out. There's nothing more fun as a father to watch a son succeed, and that's a real joy.
I'm trying to figure out how to be more strategic and how to raise my son when I want to be more purposeful.
You have to not only develop this person's character, you have to develop them as a person, you have to do all the things that a dad has to do. My dad did this with me, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do.
Today in America, many sons don't feel close or connected with their dads. There are many reasons for that, but I don't think there's a dad alive that wouldn't want to be an effective father. The question is, how? Many times dads hang around their sons, but they don't deliver the core substance that sons really need. And that's why we've developed this 6-part series called Raising a Modern Day Knight. In it, we help dads understand the critical issues that they need to face in order to be an effective father.
How are we doing? How you feel you're doing as a dad and a father?
Dads need to come up with a game plan of how to raise sons to be authentic men.
And I think I'm just doing all I can to keep up with being a dad.
Joining with me is Dennis Rainey, the president of Family Life. We teach them what the key issues are between father and son. We teach them how to be a strategic dad, how to build special manhood instructions into their son's life. We teach them the definition of manhood so that it can be a compelling vision for their son's life. We give them an overall fatherhood game plan so they can track their son year to year to do special moments with their son, provide special instruction, do special ceremonies, and at the end, call their son with the company of other men into this great adventure called authentic manhood. I believe this series will revolutionize your fatherhood. I want to encourage you to get some other men and join together to watch this 6-part video series where you will be able not only to become a more effective father on your own, but to be able to reach into the heart of your son and call him up into a vibrant, healthy masculinity, and best of all, a noble manhood. Being a strategic dad, there's no greater calling, men. Now, let me just tell you, next week is the last session of the first semester of men's fraternity. And so we're going to be talking next week about the 4 keys to maximum parenting. God bless you. We'll see you next week.